We're waiting just a second. Just when you got to smile or resolve.
Number 700.
All right, ready? You wait to start singing.
Okay. To the work, we are servants of God. Let us follow the path that our Master has trod. With the balm of His counsel, or strength to renew, let us do with our life what our hands find to do. Toiling on, toiling on, toiling on, toiling on. Let us hold, let us walk, and labor till the Master come. To the work, let the hungry be fed. To the fountain of life, let the weary be led. In the cross and banner, our glory shall be, while we herald the mighty salvation and free. Toiling on, toiling on, toiling on, toiling on. Let us go, let us walk, and labor till the Master come. To the work, there is labor for all, for the kingdom of darkness the terror shall fall. And the name of Jehovah exalted shall be in the loud swelling chorus, salvation is free. Toiling on, toiling on, toiling on, toiling on. Let us go, let us walk, and labor till the Master comes. Isn't this fun? Spend the day learning how to be more like Jesus, helping others to find Jesus. I have one little connection you've been talking about, one little connection. Notice at the bottom of the screen here, that is not on the sheet that was passed out this morning concerning the school. If you have your sheet concerning the school and it has the classes also listed, at the top of that page, why don't you write down that right now? That's the connection to get to the new site. I mentioned we have a brand new site. These are the folks right here. They want you to connect with them on enrolling in this school. So I want to be sure you get that before the day ends. Thank you.
And let's see, about 50% are still awake. So I just am grateful that you're here, and I'm excited to hear what our feedback is. So I want to do, before we kind of dive into the next session, I would like to talk about some feedback from the last session. So I think our 3 group leaders, do they have their microphones? So if we could they're going to bring you a microphone, and you may have to consult with your secretary to make sure that you know, but I want us to kind of think through some of the things that you had. You don't have to share everything from your group, but do think about, give me a few examples of each. So let's start out with you got connecting, converting, and coaching. So connecting is about how building relationships between Christians and non-Christians. Converting is about then setting up and conducting Bible studies and leading people to becoming Christians. And then coaching is about what do we do to help people grow in Christ so that they can then go do the same three things for others. So let's start off with the connecting. So with the group and that connecting group, you have two parts. One, what are some things you're doing now that fall in that connection category? And then, so let's start with that. Mondays for the Master, okay.
Sorry.
You're going out to
Maybe
the
I
world.
need to repeat that again.
Yes.
Okay, let's again, biblical studies, supporting missionaries, door knocking, and flea market was a part of that adjustment last time we did that, went out because of the weather. Monday night for the Master, gospel meetings, having a church website, preaching online, vacation Bible school, Mother's Morning out.
All right, that's good.
Indoor. Well, I was just trying to read. I don't know what that says.
What are some things? What are some new things y'all talked about you could do to connect?
Individual.
Well, some of the new ideas are certainly teaching men to be faithful in the church, continuing to be faithful and growing in their faithfulness. Monday night for the Master, calling people and being a part, encouraging them. And that's primarily, I guess, a lot of times for members, not so much for the outreach, but Visitors Day. How about the YouTube? The things that are on YouTube, as far as the services,
Yes.
they're all connected and so forth. And there's a lot of other tools and so forth that are available there. Advertising, sharing more often, sharing our lives individually as a church, setting example for each member, and then need another age group.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so good. That's good. Because I want you to think about what are you doing that creates connections with non-Christians. And the difference between come and go is intentionality and aggression. Not aggression, aggressiveness. That's the word I want. I don't want fighting and stuff to break out. But think in terms of often we're passive in how we connect to the world. We exist. We have a web page. We have something on YouTube. We have meeting times. Y'all come. What are we doing to intentionally connect to them? Because just because those things exist doesn't mean anybody's coming. Does that make sense? So those are all great things to have. But if you're dealing... Okay, one of the things that James Emery White talks in his book on Meet Gen Z, and it's not really so much about one generation, it's about all of us. It's all of us as a culture. He talks about how we've gone from an Acts 2 world to an Acts 17 world. In Acts chapter 2, they were devout Jews from every nation under heaven. But what about Acts 17? There wasn't a Jew in the bunch. There was nobody in the crowd probably that had ever even heard. Maybe a few had heard of Yahweh, the God of the Jews. So in Acts 2, you had 3,000 baptisms. You had a handful in Acts 17. Why? Well, in Acts 17, they're light years away from knowing who Jesus is. In Acts 2, when they showed up, they were almost Christians when they got there. You think about it. They already believed in God. They believed the Old Testament was inspired. They believed in God's morality. They believed in a Messiah. They believed God was going to send a Messiah. They just didn't know he had already come and used to live in Nazareth and died on a cross. So somebody just had to tell them who that Messiah was, how they enter into a relationship with him, and then move forward. And so that's like a lot of those Jews who became followers of Jesus would not have viewed themselves as converts. They weren't being converted from something else. They were just continuing with what they were already doing. The law of Moses taught them to follow the Messiah. They just needed to know who the Messiah was. Think back, and so what White talks about, you go back to the 1960s, 1970s, even in the 1980s. I was born in 65, and so I grew up in the 70s and 80s. My dad, I can't tell you how many Bible studies Dad's done in my lifetime, but a lot of those Bible studies we did in the 70s and 80s, most of those folks were already almost Christians when we sat down with them. Okay, if you had a Bible study in the 70s, whoever you studied with in the U.S. probably already believed that there was a God, was probably pretty open to the Bible being from God, probably even believed that Jesus was the Son of God. They just needed some clarity about some things. How to become a follower of Christ? What's the nature of his church, his people, some of those things. I'm not sure that's the case anymore. And so what White says is we've gone from an Acts 2 world to where you could just have a gospel meeting that went for 10 days in a time back in the early part of the 20th century when the only lights in the whole community that were electrical were at the church house. So you could have a gospel meeting every night, and everybody came. Because it was a different culture and a different world. But today, it's not that same culture and that same world. And so most of our Bible studies, or more and more of our Bible studies, we're studying with someone who doesn't sit down believing there's a higher power. They're open to it, that's why they're talking to you, but that may be it. And they may believe that there is a creator, but they may believe there are multiple gods and goddesses out there. And so we're in a very different place. So one of the things we have to wrestle with is how do I connect? Because that person is probably not coming to my YouTube page unless there's something that compels them to go there. Unless I'm answering some question they're asking. That's one of the things I've often heard from young people. He said, sometimes preachers, you guys are answering questions we're not asking, and you're not answering the questions we are asking. And so that's about, part of connecting is figuring out what are the questions in this community? What are people wrestling with? And how do we answer those questions? What are they? Often people can't hear you talk about Jesus for the rumbling of their children's stomachs. So what are the needs? What are the problems? How do I create situations where somebody who doesn't have any interest in God ends up being around Christians and realizes we're not bad people. We're fallen and frail. We're not perfect. But I think one of the things that's got to happen in our churches is we've got to think bigger. And we've got to think differently. The gospel is still the same gospel. I don't think we start teaching something different about Jesus because there's one Lord, one faith, and one baptism. But I do think we've got to wrestle with, in a world out there that increasingly doesn't necessarily believe in God and has lost faith, frankly, in a lot of the Christian community. You know, I grew up in a time when you said you were a preacher, you got automatic respect. Often if you say that today in the large, you get automatic, because they're not sure. Are you legit? You're a charlatan? You say one thing and do another. And so I think one of our challenges, if we're going to connect to this world, we're going to have to connect differently. And so I've just challenged you to think about how do we create relationships in this community, meet needs, interact with people. And so like there are communities that door knocking will still work in. There are communities you will get shot at. So I've got to think about my community, my culture, my neighbor, and I get there by asking questions. And so I don't know all your background. If you didn't grow up going to church or going to worship with people who believed in Jesus your whole life, then you need to educate the rest of us. Does that make sense? I grew up in a family from the time I remembered anything, I was gathering with God's people. When I was 8 years old, I'm going with my dad on Bible study. So my guess is a lot of you in this room grew up in a different world. You've got to educate me in how I connect to the person who came from your background. And we've got to listen to people's stories. Is this helping any at all? Go ahead. Were you about to say something?
As you mentioned, Acts 17, a different world and so forth, where Paul went in, all these different altars and so forth, but he took advantage of that situation, to building that connection with one of those altars to the unknown God, kind of covering all the bases. Mm-hmm. And he used that to preach the gospel, to teach them about a God they don't know. And so I just wonder if we can do a similar kind of using different vehicles to make have a common ground, a bridge, if you will, with those we come in contact with. And it's going to be a little different with each person. But
often in religious discussions, we unfortunately start with how we're different. Paul started with how we were similar. Paul looked for commonality and then took a beeline to Jesus. All right? And so, what is it? All right, so, anybody here have a bike with a motor and legs don't count? Anybody got a Harley? We got any Harley people? Honda, Yamaha? All right. Do what? Your husband. All right. So your husband can be an inroad, a connector, an inroad. Does that make sense? So, because what I'm thinking about, if you've got a bike rally, what do we in this church have in common with them? Or where can we create a point of connection? All right? Is there a parade in the area? Is there a community event? Do we have a table at it? If there's a parade, do we have a float in it? Is there a community service project? I remember, for example, in our community in Florence, the police officers wanted bags that they could give away to the homeless in downtown Florence. So, like, we have a Room in the Inn program in Florence. So from November through the end of the March, nobody sleeps on the streets, okay, during our cold period. And so there's a place you can go check in, turn in your name. They do a background check. And it's mostly churches, but other organizations, they have places for people to sleep. So you show up at 5, they put you on a bus. They're going to take you to a church building. They're going to feed you. You're going to sleep maybe in a gym. And then they're going to feed you breakfast, and there's going to be somewhere you can shower. And they'll drop you back off at that spot like 7 the next morning. And a bunch of different churches participate in that. The local police officers wanted such that when they run into someone in need, that they had a gallon bag with the essentials that they could hand to them. So they had a gathering of the community. And so you got all these people out of, and everybody had their own table. So we had a Heritage Christian University table with a bunch of our students and staff putting together those gallon bags so that police officers could give those out to those who didn't have homes. Does that make sense? So what like that is already going on in your community that you can enter in? I understand some partnerships are not appropriate, and so you just have to decide that for your community. But how can we create connections so that we get on people's radars? Those folks genuinely care about people. And I don't know what they believe, but I like them. And if they like us, then that opens doors. Often people are scared of our church buildings. To be honest, they're scared of our church buildings. And this is home. You're comfortable. All right, so let's talk about this, and I don't want to overextend this. But how many of you have ever been to a biker rally? Got 2, 3. All right, so we got 4 missionaries. So would the rest of you feel comfortable in the middle of a biker rally? I've got 3 yeses, 150 no's. So let me flip it for you. If I had an audience full of those at that biker rally, and I asked them, would you feel comfortable in the church building of the Myrtle Beach Church of Christ? They would say no. Because we're scared of what we don't know. And the biggest, toughest person in the whole wide world is nervous about the unknown. So often we connect and build relationships outside this building, in our homes, in their community. Now, a lot of folks are very protective about their home, but you often can connect through the school, through the local park, through a gathering at your house where you invite them over to eat, etc. And then something in the church building that maybe isn't as churchy. Does that make sense? Where that first time they're exposed to Christians and chicken and whatever else. And so you just think about how you gradually get used to things you're not used to. How do we stair-step the world into getting used to, first of all, God's people? And that's a first step to eventually talking about the God that God's people believe. So I just want to kind of think about that, because if our job as a church and as leaders is to connect, convert, and coach others who can then connect, convert, and coach, how do we connect to a world that increasingly doesn't believe in God at all and may not even trust God's people? Because, frankly, some people have had really bad experiences with God's people. They don't trust them. All right? The convert crowd. Talk to me. What are some things that you're doing as a congregation that connect to getting Bible studies and etc.? Go ahead, brother.
Yep, absolutely. So I guess I would start off by saying we're going to have a lot of overlap with Logan. I think we kind of discussed it depended on your role in these different things and also where you're at in your spiritual journey, on where it falls into one of the 3 C's. But a few things that we listed out: offering the invitation, being available 24/7 for Bible study and baptisms, doing individual Bible studies with individuals. Stephen does a radio program called The Christian Perspective. We also mentioned the Myrtle Beach School of Preaching and Biblical Studies, doing different workshops, youth rallies, Lads to Leaders, different Bible camps. We do a Thursday discussion here at the church where you can always bring in new people and friends. We have a rockers group that does a lot of events. You attended one, the baseball game, where we encourage people to bring friends. Also supporting missionaries. Things like Vacation Bible School is a great way to bring in people that may not be as familiar with the Word and be able to convert them. We also have a college program called Chance for Christ that we brought up as well.
Okay. And did you have some new ideas too y'all talked about?
Well, the leader wasn't efficient enough to get the group to that part, but
Okay.
afterwards we did. I had
y'all
a couple of
engaged.
things.
All 3 groups were engaged, which I was really excited about.
I think the main focus would be doing a lot more fellowship outside of the church building, more connection with people in the community and figuring out a way how to, kind of what you were talking about before, but whether it's just inviting someone out new to eat with us and that type of thing, it was really a way to help share the word.
Very good. So let's talk a little bit, elaborate on that. So what's the difference between connecting and converting? All right. Practically, boots on the ground, what is that? I got to educate. So it means, so talk to me. All right. And so that's the connecting. Connecting is building relationships and trust. Conversion is actually getting them to believe in Jesus and express their faith in repentance, confession, and baptism. Remember what I talked about before? A lot of our congregations, I believe, and this is not a you and me, and you know yourself. And so, like when I do these things, I just want the congregation, you think about how it applies to you. I'm thinking about how it applies to me and how it applies to the congregation I worship with. But I think of a lot of the Lord's church, we do 1 or 2 of the 3, but we don't do all 3. We either do a lot of things to meet people, and we have a great education program, which you might put into the coaching category, but we're not intentionally setting up Bible studies and converting people. Any conversion we have just kind of happened by accident, just because of life. We have children who are children of Christians who believe, and because their mom and dad are discipling them in the home, but we're not doing much evangelizing outside the building. And so it's possible to do 1 or 2 of these and not to do all 3 of them. So what I want to think about is, I not only want to how do I create relationships and connections with my community, inviting them to get together. It's like, we talked about the group. Like, I really enjoyed hanging out with the gang at the ball game the other night. Now, I want you to think about how many of your folks who would never come in this building, but they'll go to a Pelicans game, all right? And what can I do to get somebody? And so you think about, if you had brought a friend the other night, so technically Stephen brought a friend, okay? So Stephen brought a friend, he brought me, and he fed me supper, and he introduced me to 20 members of this congregation. Now, it was really interesting when I came in last night. I'm trying to think, okay, which ones have I met before or not, you know. But the fact is, when I came last night, I didn't come cold turkey. I knew somebody besides Stephen when I walked in the door. So what can I do to create the connections? But then conversion is about, can I talk to you about Jesus? And what I also find happening in congregation is we're not connecting because we're all passive. We just exist, y'all come to us, instead of saying, how can I get out into your world and connect to you? But then converting is really about like when I'm working in local work, and what I mean by that, like if I'm a preacher to a local congregation, one of the first things I'm going to do when I'm talking to the folks that want to help me in evangelism is I'm saying, who do we have that comes to stuff all the time that's not a Christian? Now, some of you may be in this room, so I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable or anything, but if somebody has worshiped with you 4, 5, 10 times, they're screaming at you. I'm probably okay with talking about Jesus because I come and do it all the time. Does that make sense? If they're in there, now not everybody's that way. Some are like, I'm comfortable listening to Stephen speak because he's way up there on that thing. I'm not ready for me to go to your house or you to come to my house or to meet at Starbucks. But a lot of those folks, if you've been worshiping in this building with Christians for a while, you're probably okay with somebody talking to you about Jesus. It's just nobody ever's asked. My dad was trained not as a preacher. He doesn't have a degree in Bible. He has a degree in engineering. He started out working with Lockheed in the missile and space industry and then moved over in the automotive industry and has since retired. But my dad has done more personal Bible studies than most any preacher I've ever met. And I can remember my dad one time saying, he said, I hear all these preachers saying they can't get Bible studies. And he said, I've got more Bible studies than I can shake a stick at. Now, that's a farm expression. And Dad would also say, with all he learned in engineering school, he learned more on the farm than he did in engineering school. But what he said was, he said, the problem is not that people won't study. He said, the problem is nobody's asking. So the challenge is, how do I turn those connections into conversions? I don't if I don't ever say, can I talk to you about Jesus? Can I come by your house? Okay, is there a night that works best for you? Not let's talk about this sometime, but at some point that's got to become Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. Or Wednesday morning at Starbucks at 10 o'clock because I'm off on a Wednesday, or whatever the case may be. So I want to challenge you to think about, what are you doing to intentionally turn your connections into actual Bible studies? Have you sat down and made a list of those you personally know who are not Christians? Often I just say, start with the people that are either coming or that you know who you think would probably sit down with one study with you. And you'd be shocked in most congregations how many studies you can have just like that. That you already have 10, 15, 20 people that would give you one study. It's just nobody's ever asked. I'm just trying to prompt thought today. So that stuff y'all walk back. So that was good. Y'all generated some great connecting and ideas. Great job. Anything else you want to add on your group? Good work, everybody. All right, let's talk about coaching. This is, what do we do once group 2 has baptized them? What's group 3 going to do with them? They need to know Jesus. More about Jesus.
Group 3. All right. Some of the things that we've identified in group 3 is we do a new converse class. We do a vacation Bible school. We do Mother's Morning Out. We have Bible college. And we do a Bible class for men of God's and men and women classes. And we are very, very adamant about making sure our youth attend the Last Leader Conference every year. And we do gospel rallies every year. And we attend some of the local churches that have their gospel rallies as well.
Okay. Good. Did you come up with some ideas from new things you might do to help people to mature?
Well, we came up with some ideas, but all the ideas that we came up with, things that we're currently doing, we just need to sort of revamp or revisit. And a couple of those things are mentorship program. We have a new converts class, and just reconnecting the new converts with quote unquote a mentor as part of that program as well. Again, it is currently there, just sort of revamping that process, re-energizing it, getting a few more people involved, sort of organizing some small group. What we said was by age or needs specific categories. You put a 14-year-old in a class with a bunch of 70-year-olds. What we're teaching 70-year-olds, we're teaching history on religion and Christianity. 14-year-old still trying to figure out how to be a Christian at school every day, and not So just making sure that the small groups are age and need specific, so we're not just lumping everybody in there and losing people in the process.
You hit on a couple of big things, and we'll talk a little more about it too in the third session or throughout this. But mentoring is huge. Keeping them connected to somebody. Somewhere I've read the idea that if they don't have meaningful relationships with 7 people within 3 months, they're probably not staying. I've got a friend who is youth minister at Mount Juliet Church of Christ, and he interacts with about 190 to 200 teenagers every week. And they have a rule: if he wants to be able to point to any teenager and say, name 7 people in this congregation you know by name that you recognize them and you could go talk to them. And if they can't, then they have a group that helps them to make sure they know 7 people. That's their goal, is to make sure every kid in that youth group knows 7 people by name that they can go talk to. And I think about with my dad, most of my dad's conversions are, when they do Bible studies, it's with first-generation Christians. What I mean by that is they're the first person in that family who has ever become a follower of Jesus. So there's no track record. There's no family institutional memory of worshiping God. They're starting all over. And so I have known of him continuing a study up to 3 years after baptism. Because with a lot of them, he said, because what he finds, he said, I can get them into Jesus. The problem is getting them to stay. And so you have to just keep working at it, because they came out of a background where the world is just pulling them back all the time. Think of how many times Israel was set free, and what did they spend all their time doing when they were set free? Oh, if we could just be back in Egypt. So think of how many times an addict has been set free from drugs or alcohol, and it just kept pulling them back. So mentoring, just continuing to work over time, and having that healthy mix on the coaching and educating side of a lot of intergenerational connections, while also having level of learning opportunities as well. In other words, development happens when you have a healthy mix of time to just be with people who are at my developmental level, but also healthy amounts of interaction with people at all levels. I think when we have only one or the other is when we end up with an unhealthy human being. In other words, we all learn, and we're all at different stages of life and personality development and mental development and spiritual development and personality development. All of those things, we're at different stages. So there's value in being able to have classes and gatherings that meet where I'm at. But also the research is overwhelming that the strongest faith comes when I have a bunch of connections with people at all of them. Does that make sense? And so I want the teenagers to have healthy doses of time with just other teenagers. But I want them to have massive amounts of connections to people who are 50 years older and 10 years younger. Does that make sense? So just thinking through all of those. Thanks for letting me ramble. Let's talk a little bit, and we'll just kind of see how our time goes. I want this to be something just to promote thought for you. What I want to challenge us to think about as leaders and as a church is I really believe that we've got to focus in our congregations on we're here to make apprentices of Jesus. Who has, Brother Jeff said, that means becoming eventually a journeyman. In other words, I get to a point that I can then teach and carry on that work for others, while recognizing that I learned my whole life. Okay, I've got degrees, I guess. I would be called a journeyman preacher, a journeyman professor, but I learn every day. My goal is to die having learned something the day I died that I didn't know the day before. So I do think we've got to embody at the church. That's what we're about, making disciples. And that I'm supposed to be an apprentice. I'm a learner. I'm not a pew occupier. I am a learner trying to learn to be like Jesus so I can go out and be Jesus in the world. And every one of us have got to connect, convert, and coach. So I remember when my girls were younger, they were into the Harry Potter books. And so I don't know if your family read Harry Potter books. And of course, as a parent, you're trying to encourage them to read. And so I said, okay, I'm good with you reading these. But if I catch you, trying to turn your sister into a frog or a potion, if a potion, I come in and in the kitchen you've got a big pot and you're doing a potion, we're going to go a different route. All right, as long as you understand, it's just a make believe for a story. The reason I want to mention that, anybody remember Hogwarts in the Harry Potter books? What was Hogwarts? It's a school. Okay, tell me. What's it for? Okay, so what are they learning to be? Wizards and witches. All right. Now here's why I mention that. Ephesus was the Hogwarts of the first century. All right. Except for them, it wasn't some make-believe world created by J.K. Rowling. All right. Now they didn't wave wands around and didn't fly around on brooms or know what a hippogriff was per se, but they actually believed that the spells and the potions had power over people. Ephesus was one of the places you went to learn the dark arts. You may recall in Acts, and a lot of the stories, Acts 18 and 19, but it talks about that those who were converted from sorcery were burning their magic books. Makes total sense because the second largest library in the world was at Ephesus. The biggest one was in Alexandria in northern Egypt. But the second biggest, somewhere between 12 and 15,000 volumes. And when you think of book, think more of scroll than what we think of a book today. This is actually the facade of that library. So it makes sense that we would read that in Ephesus, those being converted from sorcery are burning their books because one of the biggest libraries in the world is right there in town. And can you imagine how the locals are reacting when they've got a bonfire and they're burning? So just think about it, Hogwarts, and they're taking all their magical spell books and burning it in the courtyard. That was the impact it would have had on that community. You've got the Temple of Artemis or Diana. Has anybody here, by any chance, ever been to one of two places? Has anybody been to Athens and seen the Parthenon? All right, so I got three. Anybody ever been to Centennial Park in Nashville, Tennessee? All right, so the Parthenon in Centennial Park is built to the exact dimensions, even with the same tilt of the columns, as the Parthenon in Athens. All right, so for the six of you that have seen one of those, I want you to see it in your head. All right, the temple to Artemis was 4 times larger than the Parthenon. It was a massive structure, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. People came from all over the world, whether they believed in Athena, who was the goddess in the Parthenon. A massive statue of her was there. Whether they believed in Athena or not, when they went on vacation to Ephesus, they're going to visit her temple. They're going to buy one of her little statues. They're going to buy a little, go down at the local shops or marketplace, and they're going to buy a little replica of that temple, and they're going to take it home. And some of them are going to worship at it. Some just got it because when you go to Paris, you get the Eiffel Tower. When you go to Artemis, when you go to Ephesus, you get a little replica of the temple. Do you think it would be easy to be a church leader in that environment? You think it would be easy just for the church to survive in that environment? So I want you to think about, we talked about connecting, converting, and coaching, as we talked about the mission in the commission. That we make disciples by going and baptizing and teaching. And I talked about, we see examples of that in Acts 2. We see examples of that in Acts chapter 14 with the churches in Galatia or Asia Minor. But you also find that at work in the churches at Ephesus. Other than his work back in Tarsus, which may have lasted as many years as 13 or 14 years. Once his missionary journeys start, he spends more time at Ephesus than basically anywhere else, between 2 and 3 years. And so I just want to highlight a little bit in this session as time allows, and then the next. I want us to highlight a little bit of what Paul does to try to coach and help the church that is at Ephesus. So let's talk a little bit about Paul's perspective on leadership and what I call the Miletus Leadership Workshop. Paul did a workshop for the elders of the church at Ephesus in a town called Miletus. So the Apostle Paul has been traveling. All this is in Acts chapter 20. And he went into Macedonia and then into Greece. And so this is what has happened when he was at Ephesus. There was this massive riot that ended up culminating in this massive gathering where for hours they shouted, great is Diana or Artemis of the Ephesians. Artemis, one of those is going to be the Greek name for the god, and then you've got Diana is going to be the Roman designation. And it was actually in that theater right there. That's the ruins of the theater where this riot ended in Acts chapter 19. So after that riot, he's going to leave and he's going to travel up through Macedonia. I don't know if you can see it here. So he's here in Ephesus and he's going to work his way up through Macedonia. And he's eventually going to end up down here in Greece, where you've got Athens, and then over to the west of that, you've got Corinth. And there was a plot to take his life. He was planning to travel by sea back towards Ephesus and then all the way back to Jerusalem. But he found out there was a plot to kill him at sea. Like you're about to buy your tickets for that cruise and you find out there's an assassin on the trip, you decide, I'm walking. That's exactly what Paul did. All right? And so what he did, he was originally just going to do a sea journey. I don't think it's showing up. So he was going to take a sea journey from Corinth right there straight across over to Ephesus. But because of the plot on his life, he walked all the way back up into Macedonia, around through that area to come back down to Troas. And Troas, can you see one of the yellow dots right there just above Assos? So he's going to go to Troas, and he's on his way to Jerusalem. He's trying to get to Jerusalem before Pentecost. He's in a big hurry, but he does this really weird thing. He's in a hurry, but when he gets to Troas, he hangs around 7 days. And the question becomes, okay, if you're in a hurry, why did you wait around 7 days? Well, it looks like he waited around because he wanted to be there on Sunday. All right, he probably arrived on a Monday. So when it says 7 days in their Bible, they counted like when we talk about 7 days from now, we often think of 24-hour periods. All right, so like from today at 1 o'clock to tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we would say that's a day. For them, they would call that 2 days because you got part of 2 days. All right, so the day is a day, even though you may be starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you got part of the day. So if you wanted to get together a week later, we say, I'll see you in 7 days or a week. They would say, I'll see you in 8 days. Because today is 1 day, and then next Saturday is another day, and then you got 6 days in between, so they count that as 8. So he arrived and waited 7 days because he showed up on a Monday. When did the Christians meet? They met on Sunday. So he seems to have waited around for that. And he's traveling with people from all across Macedonia and Greece, etc., because he's taking a collection for the saints. And all these churches have participated in the collection, and so he's got representatives of all those churches. It's a reminder as leaders of our responsibility to handle God's money carefully. that make sense? All these churches are taking up a collection. He didn't just take the money and say, oh, I'll deliver it for you. Everybody just trust me. He would say, your church is giving. You pick a member and they're going with them. And so you've got an army of guys traveling with him, many of them representatives of churches who are participating in the collection. First of all, when you're traveling with a lot of money, you want a lot of bodies around, okay? You don't want to be walking down the road with all this money by yourself. So you got a small army, if you will, with you. So you've got protection, you've got accountability, then you've also got reportability, because all of those guys can go back and tell their members, I actually saw them hand the money to the apostles. I can verify that money went right to where we gave it. And so he waits around 7 days, I think likely so he can be there on a Sunday. And so at Troas, he's going to preach on that Sunday, and he's going to preach all day long. Because you don't have an apostle show up every day. So when an apostle shows up, you let him talk as long as he wants to. Because you've got to remember, they didn't have copies of the Bible. They had the Old Testament at the Jewish synagogues, but the New Testament, it's not finished yet. And it was hundreds of years before congregations of the Lord's Church had every book that's in our New Testament. Hundreds of years. Many people lived and died in congregations that only had 1 or 2 copies of a few of the books in our New Testament. So when the Bibles, the first Bibles were the apostles. And so when one shows up, you let him talk as long as he wants to. But apparently he went too long, all right? Because Eutychus is going to fall asleep and fall out of the window. So I'm very glad that these seats are close to the ground. So if I put someone to sleep, I can't raise the dead. And so I'm very happy that you're closer to the ground if you fall. So what he does is they leave Troas. And apparently Troas is not far away from Assos, is just down the road from Troas. So they're bouncing along the coast in a boat, but apparently Paul wanted to get out and stretch his legs. So the rest of the crew is in the boat. Paul chose to walk from Troas to Assos. Okay, Paul spent a lot of time in boats. And I can totally get it. I'm fine with being on the water, but if you've ever been seasick once, sometimes it's just really nice to get out and walk on dry land. And so he does. And what he's going to do is he's going to end up down here at Miletus. I don't know if you can see Miletus right there. You see where it says Lycia right above the boat there. On the back end of the boat, you've got Miletus. So he's going to end up at Miletus, and he bypasses Ephesus. He wants to talk to the elders at Ephesus, but he doesn't want to go to Ephesus. Instead, he's going to ask the elders at Ephesus. Now, he's in a hurry to get to Jerusalem, but he wants to talk to the elders at Ephesus. So he goes to Miletus, which is 40 miles south of Ephesus, and asks the elders to meet him. Why, if he wanted to meet with the elders in Ephesus, didn't he just go through Ephesus? Okay, there'd been riot, been trouble when he was there in the past. How long did he preach there? Okay, 3 years. Does he know a few people? What's going to happen when he comes to town? Okay, half the community wants to stone him. The other half wants to have him over for dinner. Either one's a problem if you're in a hurry. Does that make sense? If he goes back, you think about a town you've lived in a long time. You go back and all your buddies find out you're back in town. All right? So I know Brother Stephen. He was here 4 years, and then he went away, and then he came back. When you go back to visit a place you've been at a long time, have a lot of friendship, it's hard to get out of town. And all of those situations mean that if he goes to Ephesus, it's going to be hard to extricate himself from the city. But he really wants to talk to the elders at Ephesus because he knows trouble is coming. So what he does is he goes to Miletus, asks them to meet him, and there he has a workshop. I'd like you to take a moment and do a couple of things for me. Get my glasses on so I can read my own writing. I want you to take a moment and read Acts 20, 17 through 38 and just jot down some observations.
All of you have that sheet.
The front side is just some general information for you about Paul's journey. So it'll say at the top of the page WKV 3, the top right corner. And it'll say personal reflection, Acts 20, 17 through 38. So if you just take a moment and read that, and then just jot down some things that jump out to you. Just kind of jot down anything that comes to your mind that jumps out. I always enjoy when if a lot of folks, like in a class, we're all reading it together. But people always notice things I didn't notice, and it's kind of fun thinking about what we notice. I remember one time taking a training course on teaching, and this professor talked about an activity they did with the parable of what we call the prodigal son, or I like to call it the other brother. And he did this activity in multiple countries, where he'd have two folks, and one would read the parable to the other, or other would then, based on the hearing, would tell the parable back to him and what stood out to him. And he talked about what was fascinating is that different countries noticed different things in the parable. For example, he said it tended Bible students who were training to be preachers in the U.S. tended to notice that the guy wasted his money. Those in Russia who had been through a famine noticed that there was a famine and he didn't have anything to eat. Those from Africa noticed that when he got in trouble, he didn't have anybody to help him. Often we notice in passages things that reflect what we've dealt with in life. And so that's the value of reading Scripture in community. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So as I look at what's going on here, and you continue to write, think about two categories I break it down into. I have to break things down so I can hang on to them. I have to simplify them for myself. So what he does in this workshop is, part of the workshop, it talks about his example. He says basically, and remember, he did this among them, so they can refute it. In other words, if he's saying I did this and he didn't do it, he probably converted all these elders. All right? So, I mean, he has to be able to know that what he says is true. He should be getting nods and not wrinkled brows like, no, you didn't do that. All right? These people know whether what he says is true or not. So he talks about his example, and then we have the education section where he's giving them directions and guidance as an apostle. All right? Recognizing they're the elders of that church, but he's not a member of that church. Okay? He was for a while, but now he is working elsewhere. And so they would have been the leaders of the church when he was there, but he's operating as an elder. So you've got a very unique situation going on here. So as you think about example and education, just before I talk about some things, or we'll pull up the text, what jumped out to you in what he said? Is there anything that left off the page to you? Okay. Very good. New Testament writers talked about the Holy Spirit a lot more than we do. You'll see that in the book of Ephesians. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about Ephesians 4. He's critical to that book. I think what's for us, because of misunderstandings of the role of the Scripture, of the Spirit, we've gone to the other extreme and just retired him. So we don't want to deal with this over here, so let's just pretend he doesn't. He's there, yeah, but he doesn't really do anything. He's just off in a corner. Yes. Oh, that's powerful. Good. Tears, all three of those good. Yeah. Gotcha. Oh, by the way, I found out there are other people from Florence. You are part of. How many's from Florence? The South Carolina, Florence. All right. This is a little aside, but we're driving down the road, and Katie goes, "Hey, that sign says Florence," because we're coming across 20. And her mother goes, "Oh no, we made a wrong turn, Katie. We're back home." So we were very proud that there was a Florence here as well. So I saw a hand here and some back in the back. Okay, very good. I mean, you think a guy who can do the miracles he could do and knew what he knew? I mean, like, he's got the first century equivalent of a PhD. Okay, and then some. And he can do miracles. He's an apostle chosen by Jesus out of due season. Jesus personally appeared to him, after his death. I mean, you could probably find a few things to be a little prideful about and all that. And so it's phenomenal to me to he wept over Christians' humility, all his zeal and passion, and trusting in the Spirit and God. There were some others in here. I saw several hands up. Sorry if I interrupted you. Did I see hands somebody in the back? Yes, sir. Oh, yes. Yes. And I think about it, I don't know if y'all noticed, remember in Acts 14 when he went back, he talked about it with many tribulations and struggles, because they were immersed in a culture that was anti everything they were leaving their culture. Does that make sense? Okay, this is one of the things I saw. When I got out of undergrad, I went and lived in Israel for the summer. Okay, and what I found is, like, I lived a month in Nazareth. And in Nazareth, they're pretty much all Arabs. And when they became Christians, there's no more family gatherings. It's done. You're in Jesus, you're out of the family. All right, and so you have to really, as Jesus put it, count the cost. I think of a young lady that I found out about in Panama. I do a lot of mission work in Latin America. She was baptized. When she came home, her stuff was in the front yard. Because her family had already found out about it. She had to go find somewhere else to live. So these are people, he wants these people to understand that. Hey, it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. So that's good. Right. Here and then back here. For me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I have equipped you. The time is coming that I will no longer be able to ever give you the opportunity to converse or to come back to me. I've given you everything you need, and you're going to be put in a situation that you're going to be on your own.
Yeah, and he thinks we think maybe he actually did see him again, but it looks like at this moment he doesn't. So Paul is given glimpses of the future, but he's not told everything about the future. Does that make sense? And so it looks like at this point he doesn't think he's going to see them again. So you think about, okay, all they've been through together. It's got this one last shot. What do I say to them? I see you, brother. Yes, sir.
Although I have equipped you and prepared you and teach you, but when I leave, the wolves are going to come in behind me. Mm-hmm. And they're going to try to undo everything that I've done, everything that I've taught you, try to confuse you. So just be aware.
And to me, I find myself thinking maybe that's why it was such a big deal to him he got to talk to them. Like if you know their wolves are coming, and you think about your own children. All right? So we got some moms and dads in here, so these are yours, right? So let's say you found out that a carnival semi turned over and 3 lions are roaming around in the parking lot. Do you go back to your car the same way you left it come in the building? Suddenly we're all deciding, I like it in this building. It's quite fine in here. We have bathrooms. We can sleep on the pews. We don't need to go anywhere, right? We care about and protect those we love. I think you would die for those 2 boys. For Paul, these churches became family. He would literally die for them. And so I want you to think about when he knows something about the future. He knows spiritual wolves are coming, and it's going to be some of the elders he worked with. And so I can just imagine, I've got to talk to them. I've got to talk to them. Maybe he's hoping the potential wolves will change their hearts and minds. Maybe he just wants the other guys to know, hey, can you trust Bob and Fred? I don't know, but he's saying trouble's coming. And it's going to be some of you. So by knowing what's coming, we can be better prepared for it. So our daughter that's with us, Katie, has special needs. She has Turner syndrome. It's a genetic disorder, and she has cerebral palsy. And so I can remember when they first started doing these tests on her, she spent about 15 days in the hospital. And so for a while, I'm in Cosair Hospital in Louisville by myself, and my wife had emergency C-section, so she's in another hospital in another city. And so you can tell when what they're doing is different from what they've been doing for the last 3 days. They're running new tests. And so I'm like, okay, what are y'all testing for? And so you get all these stares like, I'm not the one supposed to tell you. And so you ask enough and said, we're doing a test for something called Turner syndrome. And I said, what in the world is Turner syndrome? And so finally, one of the nurses takes me back into their little nurses station room and pulls 2 medical books. I'm like, they're boat anchors, okay? She pulls them off the shelf and hands them to me. And I'm reading what it says about Turner syndrome. And I just wanted to be sick to my stomach. But they're talking about all the worst case scenarios. Now, fortunately, a lot of the worst case scenarios, Kay doesn't have to face. It'll impact her the rest of her life. But I'm going to tell you, even though reading that stuff scared me to death, I was better able to deal with the results because I knew the possibilities. It was the unknown. What are you looking for? What does it mean? And so I'm prepared. Hey, she could have to have open heart surgery. Okay, I've got to get ready for that. She could have major kidney problems and have to have new kidneys. Okay, I'm prepared for that. Does that make sense? Paul is saying wolves could be coming. You better get ready for that possibility. And so for him, it's very serious because it's even worse than physical problems. It's a physical danger, spiritual danger. Yes, sir. Yeah, yes, right. Well, because then, a lot of times a lot of people became false teachers because they found out you could make a living off of it. And so if you went into the community and claimed that some god or goddess gave you some new message, they'd give you clothing, they'd give you housing. Usually they paid you in food, money, and housing, more so than gold and silver. But those were ways people financially supported the traveling, enlightened ones speaking for whatever god or goddess they came to be speaking for, or those who claim to speak for God. That's why John had to say, test the spirits. Not everybody comes and says they're talking from God. Actually, talk to God. Okay, they may be talking to the wall, and so you need to don't support them unless you know what they're doing. And so, yeah. So he says basically, I'm not in it for the money, which I think is something that a lot of us as preachers and youth ministers will listen to. You think about if you look in Matthew and Luke, and around chapters 9 and 10, he talks about the sending out of the 12 and the sending out of the 70. And he talks about when you find a home to live in, be content in that home and don't jump to other homes. Because the day one, a lot of the early converts would be folks who were not financially well off in a lot of the communities. But then on day 4, you convert to a local millionaire. I'm moving to your house. Paul says, no, you stay in the house you're at. It's not about how big the house is, the parsonages, the words we use today. It's not about the physical thing. And Paul says, I didn't do it for the money. I think those are some powerful things. Because I think about what he talked about, here are just a summary of some things that stood out to me. He was willing to suffer. These are some of the, I put some blanks there if you want to put them in there. It embodies what you just talked about. He was willing to suffer for the sake. He was selfless. It wasn't about, he was humble. He didn't do it for the money. He didn't do it for personal gain. And then I think the first comment that was made was about his zeal for declaring. Twice he uses this phrase, he did not shrink back. I was not afraid to declare the whole counsel of God. And so one of the things we need to think about in our congregations, if we're going to disciple people into the likeness of Jesus, are we declaring the whole counsel of God? Okay, so one of the things I do a lot of work with youth ministers, and youth ministers are often in charge of 12th grade and down, doing the curriculum education program. So I do a decent amount of work with education directors and youth ministers who are doing the education programs. And one of the things that I talk about is what's your plan for your program? And I want to dive into that some more in our discussions after lunch when we look at Ephesians chapter 4. But I want you to think about often how do classes happen in our congregation? What do you like to talk about? Oh, you like the Gospel of John? Good. Would you just do John next week? What do you like to talk about? Oh, you love Revelation. Could you do Revelation next semester? And that's how our classes come together. You just talk about what you want. And so a bunch of people get done, and 15 years later, they spent 3 years on the book of Acts, and they've done John and they've done Revelation, never touched the Old Testament. We have no balance. We haven't declared the whole counsel of God. We've declared the books we like to talk about. And then we wonder why we don't have balanced, well-rounded Christians. Paul said, I didn't hold back anything you needed to hear. That's powerful. Every education director should be able to say, we didn't hold back anything that you needed to hear. And so I didn't put this other list. I'm sorry I didn't do that. So those 3 S's for me came out of verse 17 and forward. But then you got a break, and you come back in verses 33 through 38. And these are 3 things that I highlighted from that. Greed, grit, and giving. And he didn't do it for the money. He had a strong work ethic. And I stress this a lot with our students at Heritage. You earn respect by hard work. All right? Sometimes we can feel entitled. And I said, I tell some of these, you got a 22-year-old coming out of college with a 4-year degree. And they're going to walk into that pulpit, and there's going to be a 75-year-old farmer in the back, and he's going to be thinking, oh, I know all about the Bible. What can you know? And often it's a 75-year-old Bible that can quote most of the New Testament. And I said, you got to earn people's respect. And I said, you do that by working hard, by living right, by respecting people, especially people older than you. And if you act right, and you work hard, and you respect age and experience, in time they'll respect you. But there's no substitute for hard work. They asked me to speak at graduation recently. So it's my last graduation because I'm transitioned from being president the last 8 years back to the classroom. Teaching and preaching are my first loves. So I agreed to be president for a few years only because they would let me also teach. But I went in with the understanding that I'm not staying in this job. I'm going to help you get through a transition, but I want back in the classroom. Okay? And so one of the things I talked to the students in that, what would be my last graduation, they asked me to be graduation speaker. And I talked to them about the importance of hard work. I said, there have been many times in my life where I worked with people who were better, stronger, faster, and everybody was taller. But I never wanted to be in a room with people who could outwork me. I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room, but I didn't want anybody to work harder than me. Because I couldn't ask them to be all in for Jesus if I'm not all in for Jesus. Paul was all in. And often I found that if you work hard and love people, they'll forgive you for 150 boring sermons. But if you're arrogant and don't care about anybody and lazy, they'll start complaining the first Sunday. Paul worked hard. He was selfless and giving. And in his statement, we get a quote from Jesus that we wouldn't have had if Paul had not done this workshop. And you've got this beautiful thing at the end where they're weeping and saying goodbye, and it's a window into the relationship that ought to exist between leaders and members. I want you to think about it. You've got elders and preachers / apostle. And I think of how many churches I've known of where the preachers and the elders, the youth minister and the elders and the deacons and the preachers didn't get along with each other. And then I read this passage where they are bawling their eyes out because they think they're not going to see each other again. And it reminds me, this is what it ought to be like in our churches. We need to quit this fighting among the leaders. That we ought to love each other deeply and treasure the relationship with each other and treasure the relationship with God. So, as I think about what's going on here, he is then going to ask them to do 2 things. To be on guard and to be on alert. Be on guard means you are over a flock and you pay attention to that flock. You pay attention to what you're guarding. But being alert implies that you're watching for enemies who may attack what you're guarding. So pay attention to your job and what you're guarding, but also keep your eyes open for enemies. And then he tells them why they need to do that. Because they've been appointed to this job by the Spirit. That when that congregation made them an elder, it looks like the Holy Spirit put a stamp of approval on it. And then it gets really serious. Number two, that you are over a flock purchased by God. It's not my church, my congregation. I may say it's my family, but it's God's family. It's God's community. It doesn't belong to me. I didn't die for it. It wasn't my blood that was shed on that cross. And a lot of our bickering and fighting in our congregations happen because we think of it as ours. The reality is, it's His. The Myrtle Beach community of God, congregation, Church of Christ, it belongs not to Myrtle Beach, not to anybody in this room. It belongs to God. And so when I understand that, I live and act differently. So I think he gives us some great insight into how to be the kind of leader that can disciple others. Does that make sense? Because he's talking to elders that he would have discipled. And so as we think about what Jeff said, that the goal of an apprenticeship is that you can actually practice it. He has taught and mentored these men, and now they have become elders. And he did it by living out genuine faith in front of them. I feel like that, I talk, a lot of folks, students will talk about, what are the most important traits of a leader? Here's two. And you think about even as they found a president that would replace me. There are many different types of leaders in the Bible. Joshua and Moses didn't lead the same way. Paul and Jesus didn't lead the same way. John the Immerser didn't lead the same way Peter did. But two things every leader has to have is integrity and do it for God's glory. Alan Simpson says, if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. If you have integrity, nothing else matters. Integrity and glorifying God. It has to be for His glory. And that's what I see in Him. So what I'd like us to do is get in our groups for about 10 minutes. I think at 11:45, we're going to break for lunch. So here's what I'd love you to do. You can see at the bottom of the page. Are you three men mind doing that again? Are y'all okay with that? Thank y'all for leading us. So what I'd like you to do is just as what you can in the next few minutes. So y'all can watch the clock back here. And when the smell of the food becomes too much, feel free to make a break for it. No? All right. So Stephen, withdrew that. So I want you to think about what scared you the most about Paul and how will this impact actions for the future. Number two, some things your congregation can do to better train leaders and coaches that are like the kind of one he described. And what is one thing this discussion inspired you to personally do to grow as a leader and a Christian to be more like Paul described in this? Is that okay? Mark, set, go! And then we'll talk about it after lunch. You survived 2 sessions. Woo. Be careful.
he does. And Father, we pray that you continue to be with us through the rest of this day and through this weekend. Father, we're thankful for the food, and we're thankful for Jesse and Mary. Pray you continue to bless this food. We ask this prayer through this name. Amen. Amen.
What time do we get back here? 12.